All right. I'm David Agranoff, and if you're finding me through Gina Ranalli, I'm the author of Punk Rock Ghost Story, Amazing Punk Stories, The Vegan Revolution with Zombies. But we're here to talk today about World Revolver, which is a book that I just read by Gina Ranalli. But Gina does not do a ton of audio interviews, so I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to ask a few questions about a few of her other books in her back catalog before we get started. So if you're a person that is not familiar with Gina's work, Gina, why don't you give us some highlights or some things like what are the three books that you would first tell people to read if they were first checking out your work?
Well, I guess I'd probably go with the most popular ones, which incidentally happen to be favorites of mine too, which would be Suicide Girls in the Afterlife, which is a really kind of bizarre little story that a lot of people familiar with the bizarre genre might already know. Another is my horror story, straight up kind of ghost story, which is House Fallen Trees, published by Grindhouse Press. And I think a third one might be just for something different, would be the book we're probably going to talk about today, World Revolver.
All
Just a
right.
little sci-fi tinge kind of thing.
And we'll get back to that one. House of Fallen Trees is my personal favorite, although I have a soft spot in my heart for Mother Puncher, which is a dystopian science fiction bizarro kind of thing too.
Right.
And that's something that I really appreciate about your bibliography is that it is very diverse. From like a surreal book like Wall of Kiss, which is about a woman falling in love with a wall in her apartment, I believe. And then House of Fallen Trees is pretty much a straight up ghost story.
Right.
So do you probably don't think about genre when you're sitting down to write a book, right? You just kind of follow the idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it just kind of depends on, we're just really fluid, with the ideas. Sometimes the it comes as like a creepy, just basically a photograph or something like that, and the mood will set itself. But yeah, so I tend not to think about genre until after. And that's when you really start thinking about it in terms of marketing and stuff like that, and what labels you want to put on it. But other than that, I mean, to me, all of my stuff is just Ranalli stories.
Right. House of Fallen Trees specifically is very also rooted in the Pacific Northwest and kind of that setting. I just with that one you talked about it starting with a picture. Like, how did that idea kind of start to percolate? Because that is just a really excellent take on ghosts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the first image that really came to me was the huge ship, like sort of marooned in the middle of an old forest. Which, you've been to the Pacific Northwest, obviously. There's so much like really kind of old growth forests out here, and I just thought, I don't know, that would just be, and we're so close to the ocean also, and here in on the coast, but yeah, so just that image kind of popped up in my head as a house just sort of built in the shape of a ship that was long abandoned, and what could that story be? And if you were in the house, it would make these kind of creaky sounds as if it was actually on the ocean. And I think that's pretty much where the seed of that whole story came from.
Now, when you had that picture in your head, at that point, did you go like, I want to do a straight up horror novel, or did you just start writing and it came as it went?
Well, the second thing that came to me it kind of not even related was the phrase "two men have the carcass," and I was, thought, wow, that's just a creepy phrase, and that's really what I started with just that phrase and what it could mean, and then it was, a little bit later that I sort of put it together with the idea of the stranded ship in the forest. So, yeah, those two things sort of came together to form Fallen Trees.
Which would personally be the one that I would tell people to read first. Although I think your list of three is pretty good. Those are all ones I really like. I know Chemical Gardens is a very formative book in your catalog, so I think once people get in there, that's a really important one too.
Right.
And but for me, probably my three would be House of Fallen Trees, Mother Puncher, and World Revolver. So, just to put in my 2 cents. Now, I grabbed Mother Puncher off the shelf, and one of the reason why I did and really want to bridge to World Revolver is that it seems to me like these books have a little bit of in common, or a little thread in common. I don't know if that's just me reading too much into it, but mostly in the kind of dystopian sense of, and World Revolver doesn't start off as a dystopian, but it definitely has elements of dystopia. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but before we talk about World Revolver, Mother Puncher is somewhat of a message book, right?
Absolutely.
Not to put too much of a pun on it, but it doesn't beat anyone over the head necessarily, but it is a message book. Did you come out with I want to make a point about this, or did it just kind of I don't know, did it come out as did it start as I want to make a point about something, about the environment or whatever?
I think initially I just thought it was a funny idea, and in the writing of it, it occurred to me that, wow, this is really saying something about, how I feel about society in general, and this vein of misogyny that runs through our culture, and how I see it, and how, if anyone's paying attention, they can see it, particularly in this climate, just getting excessively worse and worse and worse and worse. So, I think ultimately, it's just kind of a fun, goofy book for if that's how you want to read it. And if you want to dig a little deeper, you'll see that it's actually just really dark satire and a social commentary, really.
Yeah, both on misogyny and environmentalism too. It hits more than one issue, and I think Ed Means as a character, it's really interesting too, because having Ed Means be like the lead character in it, and being a man, for such a story, you could have done it from the perspective of somebody who's terrified of the guy, but I think seeing it through his eyes puts a really interesting edge on the book. But
yeah, it didn't. I think it would have been too over your head if Ed wasn't ultimately sort of a kind of likable, sympathetic guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't want to bludgeon people with the story. I just kind of wanted people to think about it, I guess.
Yeah, and I really really love Mother Puncher. Now, a much more subtle message. However, I feel like, am I correct in assuming that it may not have started out this way, but World Revolver definitely is a message book too, to a certain degree. And I don't say that insultingly, because I like message books. Did it start off that way, or?
No, I don't think. I think again, it's just sort of evolved into that. Um, but yeah, it's definitely kind of sort of my looking at the world through a really cynical lens. I think because unfortunately, I do tend to be cynical about the way society is going right now, and all that kind of stuff that I know you and I have talked about that sort of thing before, but
Right.
yeah,
Well,
just kind of being a general misanthrope, I guess.
right. And I think that's one of the reasons why the book speaks to me because, obviously I feel much the same way, but I don't think people should feel like, like the book doesn't, it's not like a complete takedown from beginning to end.
Right, right. Hmm.
So here's maybe we should give some a little bit of what the book is about. Maybe like a short pitch of World Revolver.
Yeah, it's set in a near future, and the world has basically gone to crap, and the protagonist is this guy who is not necessarily the most likable guy. He's a junkie, and he basically his entire purpose for existence is looking for the next high. And there's a new drug that he is introduced to called satellite, which is kind of not like any other drug. Which is sort of where the sci-fi element of the story comes in, that it kind of propels you into an alternate dimension, multiverses of yourself, basically. So he gets to experience all these other potential lives, but really briefly.
Right, and I think that the first part of the book kind of has a more of a comedic level of like where he's sampling these other different lives. And one of the things I really like about the book is that in the beginning, you're just kind of having fun watching him see these different worlds. And in that sense, World Revolver kind of starts off almost like less. It doesn't feel as much like a novel as it does like a short story collection almost, because each of these lives is so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that and the writing of it was like that too, because I was, just having new circumstance, new setting, pretty much knew everything except for this one grain of constant, which was the main character. And so, yeah, it could easily sort of be taken as some interconnected short stories, just with the same character.
All right. So one thing that did drive me nuts with this book, and I know it was intentional, is no page numbers. Was there a specific reason for that?
It's kind of, I sort of wanted it to be almost you can open the book at pretty much any place, I mean, obviously start at a chapter beginning, but a lot of them they're not really supposed to be in any particular order. His experiences with, when he's in the alternate dimensions.
Kind of like
Obviously, the chapters where he is in his own dimension, they're told in a linear fashion, but the other ones, not so much. You could take them pretty much in any order almost.
Right. No, it really didn't bother me that bad. I was just kind of giving you a hard time. But it's very similar to how David Lynch doesn't put chapters in the DVDs. That was the first thing that made me think of. But so me as a person who like one of the reasons why I noticed it at all was because I usually I read on my bus commute and I say to myself, all right, I got to get to page 75 or whatever today, or I got to get to this page. And so it was funny because when I opened it up and I was like, what? I was like, oops. Yeah, Gina's messing with me here. But but yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that it could be told. I wasn't even thinking of it non-linear, but because to me, well, especially the second half, it takes a bit more of a linear approach.
Right.
Right, and so that happens. So, well, we're 15 minutes into this, so what I usually do is give a spoiler warning, and then we shift gears. Is there anything else you want to say about World Revolver to people who might be on the fence before we get into spoilers?
Um, I think it's really all I could say is that I think this, I mean, and you can tell me if you agree with this or not, but I think just the style in itself is a departure for me. I really tried to kind of use a different voice. I really tried to get into this character's head more probably than any other book I've written. And I think just stylistically, it's really different. So whether you love my normal style or hate it, this might be a book to check out.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know that I felt like I was absolutely like not in a Gina book, like or like whoa, this is something totally different and new. But what I did feel it was very strong writing. Not I still think House of Fallen Trees is probably my favorite of your work, just because of the ideas. But what I definitely felt very strongly that the narrative and part of one of the things that I feel really strongly about is something we're going to talk about in spoilers, because I'm a plot and structure guy, and I'm not sure that we are on the same page about plot and structure. But
okay.
I like the plot and structure here. So, but anyway, so here's the spoiler horn, as they say on Science Fiction Book Review podcast. I'm not actually going to blow a horn, but here's your spoiler warning. All right, so we're in spoilers. First of all, of course, I love that the opening line of the book is "Don't eat animals" on its own. So, and I didn't say what it was in my review on the blog, but I said that it's one of my favorite opening sentences I've ever read. But what's funny is here's as a plotting and structure guy, I'm not sure because I'm an intense outliner. Are you an intense outliner or not, or a pantser?
Definitely more. I mean, I have outlined some of my books very loosely, and the only book, I'm not sure if you've read Dark Surge, that was a book that I outlined pretty much from start to go, and it was pretty detailed outline, but that's literally the only book that I've written that way. World Revolver was definitely flying by the seat of my pants.
All right. So, because, and that's interesting because I am definitely not a pantser. But what I liked about World Revolver is that for the first time I thought, because I was pretty sure that you didn't outline, but there was a point when I was reading World Revolver where I thought, maybe Gina outlined this. And I have not read Dark Surge yet. I definitely need to. But and the reason why is because this introduction, right? Like, I wonder, did you come back and write that introduction, or that prologue, or was that always how you started it?
Yeah, I wrote that towards the end, I think.
Yeah. Because it definitely pays off, and that's one of the reasons why I was like, oh wow, there's a really great payoff with that, and it's one of the things that I really like about the book is that I read that opener, I forgot about it as I got into the story because I got into the characters and everything, and then when it pays off towards the end. I thought it really tied the book together. Not to sound like the Big Lebowski talking about his rug, um, but it pulled the book together, and I thought that was a really cool. I just thought it it made the book work in a really good way. So, not to belabor that point, that's just a comment. As far as a question, um, yes, Jeffrey Eon is a character for you. He is definitely um, a very well realized character, and you have to be able to feel like you're still a little bit in his shoes when you go from version of him and to him. And one of the things I liked about it, and maybe you can talk about how you did this, was that there were times where I forget that he was there, right? And I'm reading about this other character, and then towards the end of the chapter, there was like some indication that he was watching or whatever. Can you talk about, how you worked that process of the book?
Um, well, it was because I wanted it to get progressively, I wanted him to be progressively more aware of what was happening, that he was sort of a passenger in every life he was glimpsing, and he glimpses them very quickly. It's sort of like a slingshot kind of thing, where those chapters are fairly short. So he's kind of like getting punched in the face with this alternate reality, and but I wanted him to gradually become more aware that he was this passenger, and for the other versions of him to be aware that there is somebody else in their head now. But and also for the reader too, I wanted kind of everybody to be on the same page, the characters and the readers.
Hmm. Well, it works really, really well. Was environmentalism like always a part of the idea, or did that come out of the discovery process of the switching between worlds?
Yeah, it was there pretty early on, because that's, in my own life, that is something that I'm concerned with and is important to me. And so, yeah, that was definitely kind of one of the original ideas that I sort of wanted to touch on and talk about a little bit.
Okay, now normally the people that like listen to these interviews that I do and go all the way to spoilers, they want to hear nitty gritty of writing like these books. And I think one of the reasons why I like doing this is because that I don't see a lot of people from the Bizarro community talking craft, like real, like nuts and bolts, like in a lot of these interviews we're just kind of shucking and jiving our books, and trying to sell them. But there's a lot of interesting choices that you made in this book besides the note page numbers, and you definitely gave me a good reason for that. Why the no quotations, and you just basically did the dash for is that it was there a specific reason why you did that, or were you just
I don't know, it was a stylistic choice, I guess. It was kind of, I wanted it to be for myself a more non-traditional novel, not non-traditional in the whole world of novels, but for myself, non-traditional Ranalli book. And that was just, one small thing that I could do to sort of get my head in the right place to tell myself that I'm not doing what I normally do.
Right, and I'll give you a side effect that happened in reading. Okay. As a reader, I had to pay a lot more attention to who was saying what, and it slowed me down as a reader, because sometimes, especially when I'm reading on the bus, which is my main place I read, I sometimes, like when I'm trying to get to that page count, I try to read really, really fast. And so one thing that it did is it slowed me down and made me consider the book more. So I actually I already like that. So, since this is near future, okay, in chapter 17, now I dog-eared this page, pun intended, um, because this was, like, I didn't even realize this was the future or this was near future. I didn't realize that until this chapter when I can't remember who's talking to that. Atropos, is that how you say it? Yeah, he basically says he tells them that the world is collapsing, right? And there's and then he also basically says, when have you? I've only seen photos of dogs. I've only to me this was my favorite, one of my favorite parts of the book, because I didn't realize. I'd just been kind of going along with this world, assuming that it was basically now, that this was have name, and so this was kind of this was a turning point in the book for me, and I wonder because I do this a lot of times when I do these interviews is. Did you see this chapter as important as I did as a reader?
I don't think so because in my head, I mean, I wanted it to be super subtle,
Right.
but yeah. So I don't think that. I just, the whole thing to me was just this sort of gradual process. It was sort of, like I don't know, like a pool filling up slowly. You know what I mean? I just wanted everything to sort of happen slowly. So it's interesting that you got that from the lack of quotation marks and stuff because it made me write slower as well. So yeah, I don't recall that chapter being a specific like wow moment for me, but
Yeah, I'd tell you what page it was, but I can't. Chapter
right.
17, Junkie 9. But yeah, so well, it's funny too because I had the same experience with Duncan when we were talking about his book, The City Awake, is because he does an unconventional numbering system for the chapters, and I read so deeply into that, and he was just laughing because I read way deeper into it than he had intended. But what it did was it gave me a twist he didn't intend, but we kind of agreed that the book, that it was okay. I had a valid interpretation. It just wasn't the one
Right.
he intended for. And then that's
Right. Well, I think that probably happens a lot with pretty much all books. You know what I mean? They say every person reads a different book. You know what I mean? We could all read the same book, but it's a different experience for every reader. So, yeah, it's interesting that you felt that way about that chapter.
yeah, yeah. It was really strong to me. Are there any of the characters or the other? Like, they're all Jeffrey, but any of the versions of Jeffrey that you were particularly fond of or that you liked writing for?
Um, I think I liked them all really. I liked him as a character in general. Just I liked sort of his befuddlement going around. Because he's I don't know. I guess I feel like that a lot. Just going through my life, befuddled a lot. So, yeah, I just I can't think of any particular chapter where I liked him more than other chapters. But I just thought it was really fun to make him drastically different in every alteration of his life.
Yeah. So okay, as far as World Revolver, for what it feels to me like overall, like this book just it has a really powerful cover too. By the way, I don't know where you got the cover art from, but or who did it, but it has a really really cool cover, and it one of the things that I think separates it, or at least um, you know, that makes it a really unique experience for me is just like, a lot of times a science fiction novel with this kind of concept, with like the multiverses and all those kinds of things, would spend a lot of energy on world building. And,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I really thought was neat about this, and it goes back to what you just said about everybody reads a different book, is that I feel like there was a lot of room for me to do the world building as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And was that intentional to because it's a very lean book.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm just basically a minimalist writer when I get right down to it. I don't spend a lot of time describing a lot of stuff. I hardly ever describe a character's physicalities and just general stuff like that. I'm not like for example, I don't know, a popular like Dean Koontz, for example, is very detail oriented. The flowers on a sidewalk, and the kind of trees that are lining the sidewalk, and what the houses look like, and all that stuff. And I'm sort of just like minimalist. Move the plot forward. Let the reader, if they want to imagine what this guy looks like, go for it. If not, if you're like me and you don't care, then that's great too.
Right.
But yeah, I just think that's just my style, and it's not conscious or unconscious. It just sort of is. And yeah, I'm just a minimalist, I think.
Well, House of Fallen Trees is very setting based, so you probably had to do a little bit more of it than you normally would like to with that one, I assume.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. But that, of course, was very clear. The setting for that book was just.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, these aren't real formal interviews. They're more just two writers having a conversation about this book, and
Right.
So it's funny because. Yeah, one of the reasons why I picked up World Revolver was because it just occurred to me I hadn't read one of your books in a while, and I felt really bad about that. And then I was like, all right, I know I missed a few, and then I looked at the concept, and I was like, yep, sold.
That's cool.
I know I definitely want to read Dark Surge and Ghost Chant are next on my list of yours, but
Oh, cool.
Cool. But World Revolver, the reason why I went to it was because it was you had done sci-fi in a sense before and done dystopia before with Mother Puncher, but it was interesting to me because you are such a minimalist to see how you handled such a kind of huge idea, and.
Right.
And I was, and it was funny because I thought, man, with that page count, that's such a big idea. Like, I admit, I was like, I was interested to see how you packed it all in, and great job.
Oh, thank you.
Because I am definitely not as much of a minimalist as you are. My first thought was. Wow, that's a really big idea. And I'm wondering, so one of the last questions I have is, it is a big idea. Like, did you have trepidation about doing such a big concept, being that you are a minimalist? And did you think about how huge the idea was when you were writing it, or at all?
Oh yeah, I definitely thought about it, and I was very trepidatious. And when I was done, I had no idea whether it worked or not. I didn't know if I had this stinking turd on my hands, or I didn't publish it for probably 2 years because I just was so uncertain of whether I pulled it off, whether it was any good. I really and I'm kind of like that anyways. I never can tell if anything that I do is good or not. But finally, I wrote it and I just sort of set it aside and didn't look at it again for a really long time. And finally, I took it out and reread it and kind of polished it up and stuff and realized, probably is good enough to put out there and maybe somebody will like it.
David did.
Yeah, I was very trepidatious about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why, but I definitely think you pulled it off, and and honestly, like that was seriously like my thought was like, this is a really huge idea. This is the kind of book that Stephen King would do like 1,500 pages,
Right. Yeah, it could be an epic, absolutely.
Right, and so it was, but of course, it helps me get to my Goodreads reading goal for the year. So by being short,
right.
And but yeah, I think, let me thumb through and make sure I'm not missing something that I really wanted to talk about. And I think if there's Bizarro writers that are out there that are listening, I think one of the lessons is, and I know, like, I've had battles sometimes with I wanted to with Porcupine Moshers of the Apocalypse, my story that was in Best Bizarro Fiction of the Decade. Like, I originally wanted to number the chapters backwards, right? Like, I wanted the chapters to count down. And Rose just said no. She was just like, no, you got enough weird stuff going on here. Like, it'll confuse me. It'll confuse some people. And what was funny is that I think in this book, some of the lessons is that the things like the no quotation marks, the things, there is a very fine line because, like Cormac McCarthy can get away without doing punctuations and periods and those things, right? But you have to be really careful as a writer, like, you don't want to get too cute with this stuff because you can go overboard with it. And what I really liked was that, so I noticed the dashes are here, and then I'm like, okay, well, now I got to look for that. And then by the end of the book, you're just kind of flowing with it. I'm wondering if you could talk about how much you think about those kinds of experimentations. Like, have you test drive stuff that you didn't think worked and dialed back on it before, or?
Yeah, well, I think initially, even with probably the first draft of that book, I was doing away with capitals. I was just going to town with just ridiculous stuff, and after I was like, okay, this is just ridiculous. No one is going to enjoy this. So, but generally speaking, I just write pretty traditionally as far as formatting goes. But yeah, I mean, who knows if I might try it again or try something different again at some point. But this could very well be just a one-shot thing with any kind of formatting experimentation.
Right, and it's so funny how one writer can pull it off and another one, like, for me, like, Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, like, doesn't use any correct grammar, and it works. But, like, I couldn't, that last exit to Brooklyn, was it Hubert Shelby? Like, I couldn't take that one. Like, I just couldn't read it. But for whatever reason, Cormac McCarthy could pull it off. And I know, like, Sylvia Plath, and then there's a few writers that are really good at doing that kind of stuff. But it's just funny because, it's such a fine line, when you
exactly.
Yeah. So
I don't know how some writers can pull it off and others can't, but yeah.
Right, right. All right, well, Gina, I just to sum it up a little bit, I just really dug World Revolver. If there's people who listened on through but have not read the book yet because they just wanted to hear writers talking, I definitely think give it a shot. I think that my three Gina picks, Mother Puncher, World Revolver, and House of Fallen Trees, are all just really fantastic examples of what Gina can do. But at the same time, Wall of Kiss is a very funny book, and it's very surreal. Like when you pitched the idea to me, that was not a book that I go, that doesn't really sound like something I would like. Right?
Right.
But I saw you read from it in Portland one time, and I laughed and thought it was funny, and so then I read it, and so a lot of times I think, especially with those of us who write these weirder books, we have to, sometimes we have to step out a little bit further to convince people of what we're doing. So I'm glad that you're ready to talk to me about this. Thanks again for World Revolver. Is there anything else you want to say about this book?
Not really. I hope people check it out. It's kind of a departure. I would love to hear some more feedback about it. So, if anyone wants to get at me and tell me what they thought and if they thought it sucked or I'm all ears.
Well, yeah, and I noticed like in Goodreads, like there was some starred reviews, but there wasn't any conversations going on about the book yet. So we got to get this going because there's a lot to talk about here, and
yeah.
I mean it's a challenge.
Yeah, well,
it's always a challenge, like with some of the weird books.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My Chinese vampire book, I can't get reviews for that for any.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah. So.
All right, well,
Gina.
I definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah. It was good talking to you, and later on, or let's say goodbye to the folks out there. Check out Gina's books. Thanks a lot.